What was your full name?
Paul William Gatlin.
Do you know why you were named that?
Paul, because myself and my 6 siblings were all named after saints, Roman Catholic saints.
Interesting.
The middle name is my father's name.
When and where were you born?
In 1954 in Albany, New York.
What can you tell me about your childhood neighborhood and homes?
The first neighborhood I remember, I think we lived in it until I was 5. And that was after World War II. The GIs came home. There was lots of jobs. They got married, they had kids, and they started to mass produce houses. And this was a neighborhood development. Before that, houses were lot by lot, and there were companies that did this. At any rate, so there was probably 50 homes in this, and it was surrounded by apple orchards on one side and a elementary school on the other. And the second one I remember was a bigger lot, an acre lot, on a dirt road called Vines Road. And my parents lived there until I had left home. You know why they call it Vines Road?
Why?
Because the trees were covered in grapevines, wild grapevines.
What were your brothers and sisters' names?
I was the oldest. Next was Mark, then Eric, then sisters Gwen, Beth, and Lucy, and the youngest was Gary.
What kinds of things did you do for fun when you were my age?
Oh, right. So I was in that second neighborhood on the dirt road, which they eventually paved. But they didn't pave it until I was going to school. So a dirt road like that in the north gets big potholes. So we learned to ride our bikes on the dirt road, and it was surrounded by farms compared with that first neighborhood that had a school next to it. So it was further out, and it was maybe 20 houses on slightly larger lots. And so I had friends in the neighborhood, and my brothers did, all our age. But that was common at the time because new houses, new families, there's a lot of kids.
Where did you go to school?
For both those neighborhoods, they were served by Burn Hills, Ballston Lake High School. And there was a junior high associated with that, not next to it the way they build them now, but both those were about 7 or 8 miles from the house, so we went to school on a bus.
What was your favorite subject?
Oh, one more thing about elementary. Elementary, I went to a Catholic school like you, from kindergarten through 8th. And that was a longer bus ride. That was about a 30-minute bus ride. That was in Scotia. And then we went to public school after that.
What was your favorite subject?
In high school, it was math, and next was social studies because I liked those teachers too.
Would you tell me something about school when you were my age?
So that was parochial school. You're in fourth grade. So in fourth grade, now at the time, that Catholic school had a nunnery right next to it. So all the teachers were nuns. And
So what they used to do, like in the 50s? Like when
well,
nuns were
so if you
teachers?
didn't pay attention in class, they'd use a ruler on your hands. And then if you were really bad, you went to the principal. They were all Sister Mary Blank.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
nuns were.
And they had, the principal had a big canoe paddle. But you had to be bad to make it there.
What were your parents' names?
Uh,
And
William.
would you tell me
William-
a little bit about them?
William, Bill, he goes by Bill. W.H. Gotham, William Harry Gotham. His dad, my grandfather's name was Harry.
What
and-
was your mother's name?
Phyllis. Phyllis Rose Lonergan.
Is there anything interesting about your parents?
Well, my dad he left high school and immediately went in the Army. He wasn't drafted, but he was he would have been drafted. And he was trained in a tank destroyer squadron. He had never left New York. But once he went in the Army, his training took him to Arizona and Texas, and he still remembers it. They had the big open spaces to train the tanks. And then he arrived in Holland right after D-Day, and he made it as far as he made it over the Rhine into Germany before he got shot. And he survived the wound. When he came back to the States, he went to engineering school on the GI Bill, and then he immediately found a job. Jobs were plentiful. Now my mother went to St. Rose College in Albany, and then she majored in English. She taught English at Columbia College, University in New York. And then out of that, she volunteered to go to Germany to teach, after the war, to teach children how to speak English. And she really liked that whole experience. And she was, even though she was the mother of 7 kids, which couldn't be easy, because my brothers and sisters, unlike me, were bad. She was an amateur thespian. You know what a thespian is?
No.
An actress. So she always belonged to the local community theater, and whenever she got in a play, all the kids would go one night. Usually the plays ran 2 weeks or so. I don't know how
So she was like an actress?
She was an actress. She's done, I don't know how many plays. So it was, I don't know how she found the time, but I don't think she slept that much. There's people that, can operate on a couple hours sleep.
Would you tell me something a little bit about your grandparents?
So my mother's parents,
Let's just stick with your dad's grandparents.
okay. My dad's parents lived in Fort Plain, New York, and they grew up in the area. And my grandmother, they were both from German stock. My grandmother spoke German because her parents had immigrated from
In the 1800s.
Germany. Yeah. And that so Fort Plain's along the Mohawk Valley in New York State, so it's farm country. And my grandfather, my dad's father, had a number of jobs associated with farming, and then he started a butcher store, and he lost the store in the Great Depression. My dad learned, he worked in the store as he got older before he went in the army. And he said when they finally lost the store, people would, to pay their bills, people would give them cars. And at one point they had 5 Ford Model A's. You couldn't sell them, so you couldn't keep a business going like that, which is too bad. And then but when I knew him, he was still working in a butcher shop. And he would take me in there, let me hang around for a day, and watch what was going on.
Do you have any favorite memories of family traditions?
I get, well, two, on my mother's side, my grandfather and grandmother, my grandfather was a Yankee fan. My dad's father was a Yankee fan. But they all lived and grew up in New York, and so they had been fans since they were kids. Anyway, my mother's dad, and that was Frederick was his name, and his wife's name was Irene. And they had, my mother and she had 2 brothers, and everyone would come to their house on Thanksgiving. And they had a big house. He worked for the railroad, and he was an executive. And so they had the biggest house that we had ever seen. Now it was an older house in the city of Albany, so it wasn't a new style, but it was a big old house. And so I remember the Thanksgiving dinner all around a big table, and with lots of kids running around the house wrecking the place.
Like, what was your favorite food?
One more tradition. My dad's mother and father, so that's Harry and Clara. They would come to see us because you can imagine with 7 kids, we had a station wagon, but you got to stuff the station wagon full to take them to visit anywhere. Well, they would come every Sunday from Fort Plain. It was about an hour drive, but for them that was, a bit of a getaway. And they would always bring fantastic meats from the grocery store. But I remember them, from his butcher shop. But that's what I remember. Every Sunday they showed up to see us. And on Christmas, they'd come on Christmas Eve, and then they'd sleep with us for Christmas morning, which was a riot, right? A literal riot.
Because you have 7 kids.
Right.
When did you leave home? Where did you live after you moved out?
So the first time I still lived at home through my undergraduate work at Rensselaer, at engineering school in Troy, New York. And then I moved to New Jersey for graduate work at Princeton. And then I moved directly, I got a job right after Princeton and moved to New Orleans.
What company did you work for?
For Shell Oil Company.
What job did you have there?
I was an engineer.
Did you go anywhere for work trips?
We had a variety of oil fields domestically in the U.S. So I flew domestically to different offices and different oil fields. And then we lived in Michigan for 6 years, which had a 150-mile oil trend and a variety of facilities there. And then later in my career, we moved back to New Orleans for a deep water play, where the facilities were in 2,000 to 10,000 feet of water, the floating facilities, and the oil wells were on the seafloor, and then the production went to the surface to be processed for pipelining out of there.
Did you leave the country for work?
Yeah, so after that, a few big projects in the Gulf of Mexico, I worked on a project for off West Africa, off Nigeria, and that was a bit of a different project because the ocean conditions are much gentler than the Gulf of Mexico, so no cyclones, no hurricanes off West Africa.
Because it's Africa.
Yeah, so you can make a different type of floating facility, but it was still a deep water play that started in the Gulf of Mexico.
Is there anything cool about the places you went?
Well, I also worked on some projects in just off the coast of Venezuela in South America. I got a chance to work on a couple of projects in Alaska, and also a couple of projects in Alberta territory of Canada, and then in the Far East worked on projects in Singapore, which is a very nice place, and went to China for some projects. And China was interesting just because of the amount of people there. We worked in a seaport city.
Because that's where all the oil is, right?
Well, there was a shipyard we were doing work in.
Because it's a port city.
Yeah. So if you're going to build ships, you got to be right on the ocean. So that's what that was about. But the interesting part of it, we'd always go through Shanghai. And Shanghai, they think there's 20 or so million people. They're not really sure. And then we went to what they called a small city, where the seaport was, and that has 8 million people. Well, Houston, if you add up the city and the adjacent counties, that's about 7 million people. And Houston, you go through there, you know you're in a big city. Well,
I mean, same for California and Florida, right?
right. So, but 8 million people in China, it was hard to tell because of the lack of traffic. People ride bicycles and they ride electric motor scooters. And so you could drive on the highways, which are excellent. They've built excellent highways, but there's not a lot of traffic. It was interesting. Oh, and Korea. Korea's a nice place. Very hardworking people. And all of those Asian experiences interesting. Not that I mean, they speak quite a bit of English in Korea, and they speak English almost exclusively in Singapore because it was a British colony.
Well,
But
that's
anyway.
where Australia is, right? So it's right next to it.
Not
I mean,
too far.
it's-
Well, it's a 7-hour flight, but it's not. It's pretty close
It's,
compared to
it's
us.
those islands right next. How did you meet Lily?
I met her at Shell's refinery outside New Orleans, in North.
What were the names of your 3 children?
Forrest is the oldest. He is 40 now. And Simon is the second, the middle one. He's 35. And Denton is the baby, but he's 30 years old. He's kind of a big baby.
What do you like to do on your free time?
I like to travel and see things in the United States, or I like hunting turkey, deer, or other pigs. Pigs are really fun to hunt.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell me?
Oh yeah. So one new hobby that opened up is like a second career watching sports. So all 3 of my sons played sports. And your Lily and myself watched them grow up, play different games, and now we get to watch you and your brother do the same. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it's probably going to go on for a couple more years. Well, thank you, Papa.
You're welcome.
22 minutes. I'm sure everybody else took like an hour.
Yeah, you
I mean, shoot, that was actually pretty short.
Yeah, you went after.